Welcome, wanderer of the night. Imagine a moonlit sea stretching endlessly in every direction, black water rippling like silk under silver light. The air smells of salt, smoke, and sweat. Somewhere in that darkness, a ship rocks and creaks, its sails torn, its decks slick with seawater. A lantern swings, throwing gold light across weathered faces. These are the faces of pirates, not the kind painted in children's books or Hollywood adventures, but men who have not bathed in months, who cough salt into their hands, and who have long forgotten what silence sounds like. Welcome back to the channel, where history does not sparkle, it breathes. Tonight, we are leaving behind the polished myths and walking straight into the truth about pirates, not the tales of buried gold or noble rebellion, but the rough, blistered reality that most of them lived and died in. When you hear the word pirate, what picture forms in your mind? Maybe it is a tattered flag fluttering against a bright Caribbean sky. Maybe it is a one-eyed man laughing as he holds a chest full of jewels. Maybe it is a promise of freedom, life without kings, rules, or chains. That image has followed us for centuries, whispered through stories, games, and films. It is tempting, is not it? The sea, the freedom, the rebellion against order. But if we were to lift the veil on that legend, to step aboard one of those ships, barefoot on a slick, disease-ridden deck, the dream would rot faster than a barrel of salted meat in the tropics. The real life of a pirate was rarely a life at all. It was a sentence of hunger, infection, and fear disguised as liberty. Before we dive in, it is worth asking, why did this myth ever appeal to us in the first place? Why do we still cheer for the outlaw? Maybe because pirates represent something we secretly crave: escape. The idea that we can sail away from the world's rules, carve our own path, and live wild and unchained. But the sea is a cruel teacher. It takes that fantasy and grinds it against wood, salt, and time until only truth remains. History calls the early 1700s the golden age of piracy. Golden, though, only from a distance. Up close, it was more like iron, rusted and sharp. The Caribbean, the coasts of Africa, and the Indian Ocean swarmed with ships flying black flags marked with skulls, hourglasses, and daggers. To merchants, those symbols meant terror. To the sailors aboard, they meant survival barely. You see, pirates did not sail to find adventure. Most of them fled hunger, tyranny, or the lash of a navy whip. Some were shipwrecked sailors with nowhere else to go. Others were enslaved, coerced, or desperate. Freedom was not what they found. It was what they kept chasing, just beyond the next horizon. Let us pause on that word, freedom. It is seductive, especially at sea. Out there, no king's law can reach you. No church bell marks your hour. No landlord waits for rent. But freedom, without shelter or mercy, becomes another prison. When you are cold, soaked, and starving, the horizon looks less like escape and more like punishment. The first thing to understand is that pirates did not live in a world of color and music. Their world was mostly gray, the gray of storm clouds, wet canvas, and unwashed faces. Life on board was constant noise, ropes snapping, sails flapping, men shouting. The deck smelled of tar, sweat, blood, and decay. Days blurred into nights, and nights stretched into endless watches under skies that never stopped moving. You might imagine adventure. They imagined the next meal. A biscuit filled with worms could feel like luck. A sip of fresh water was a miracle. And if you fell ill, and many did, there was no doctor, only a mate with a knife and rum for courage. The sea did not care about your courage. It simply rolled on, indifferent. Still, something about this life called to people. Even through the hardship, the story of piracy grew into legend. Sailors whispered about freedom on the open sea, where every man shared equally in the plunder and the vote. In a way, pirate ships were one of the earliest experiments in equality. Captains could be overthrown by their crew. Shares were divided not by title but by task. It was messy democracy built on danger. And that small spark of fairness, however brutal its setting, made the myth last. Because the truth is, pirates were both rebels and victims. They defied kings but lived in conditions worse than prisoners. They dreamed of riches but died for a handful of coins. They sought liberty but spent every day in chains of another kind: hunger, disease, fear, and endless motion. Let us imagine the scene more closely. The sun rises red over the horizon, painting the water with fire. The ship groans as it turns. Men stir from sleep, if they ever slept at all. Their clothes are stiff with salt, their skin cracked from sun and wind. They curse, stretch, and start the same routine again: hauling ropes, scrubbing decks, patching sails. The wind tears through their hair and their sanity. The smell of unwashed bodies mixes with gunpowder and rot. Someone is always coughing. Someone else is always bleeding. Yet in this chaos, there is order, a strange, violent order. Pirate crews had rules: no fighting aboard, no stealing from each other, equal shares of loot. They punished betrayal swiftly, often with death. It was democracy born from necessity, not idealism. Because on a ship of desperate men, fairness was the only glue stronger than fear. And still, the romantic version survived. Maybe because people on land needed it. They needed a symbol of rebellion that felt exciting, not grotesque. They needed to believe that somewhere, beyond the reach of kings, men lived wild and free. That myth washed up on every shore, carried by songs and stories. It survived long after the real pirates were gone. But reality had no interest in glory. The truth is, life at sea was short. Most pirates did not live to see old age. Some died in storms, some in battle, others from wounds that turned black and never healed. And those who were captured faced public execution, a spectacle meant to warn others. Their bodies were left hanging over harbors as a reminder: rebellion does not end in freedom. It ends in silence. So why remember them at all? Because behind the myth, there is a mirror. Pirates remind us that the line between hero and villain, between freedom and chaos, is thin and often invisible. They show what happens when people pushed to the edge decide to burn the rulebook, and what it costs when they do. If you could ask one of them, say, a sailor from 1718 who once fought under the black flag, what freedom felt like, he might laugh. He might say, freedom's just another storm. You ride it till it breaks you. And maybe he would be right. When you strip away the legends, piracy becomes less about adventure and more about endurance. It is the story of humans in impossible conditions, clinging to a dream that keeps slipping through their fingers. The treasure was not gold, it was survival. Tonight, we will walk through that life together: the hunger, the fear, the strange brotherhood that bound them. But before we dive deeper, remember this: every myth begins with a truth. And every truth, when told long enough, becomes a myth again. Maybe that is why we can't let go of the pirate image. Maybe we need the illusion not of gold or glory, but of escape. The idea that, somewhere out there, there is still a horizon waiting for us, a place untouched by laws and limits. But history teaches otherwise. Even in the middle of the ocean, human nature brings its own chains. So, as the ship creaks and the waves rise, we are going to peel back the legend piece by piece to see not just what pirates did, but what they endured. You will see how every stolen ship came at a cost, how every cheer hid a scream, and how the so-called Golden Age gleamed mostly because it was built on blood. Take a breath. Listen to the sound of the wind. Picture the dark outline of the sails, the endless water, the faces of men who have not seen land in months. This is where the myth ends and the story begins. Because tonight's tale is not about adventure. It is about the human hunger for freedom, the way we chase it even when it hurts, and the strange, haunting beauty of those who dared or were forced to live without a map. Stay close. The sea has stories it still wants to tell. Picture this: you are a young sailor, maybe 20 at most, sailing under the flag of some merchant company. You have signed a contract, not for adventure but for survival, a few shillings a month, enough to send home or buy rum in the next port. You do not love the sea, but you respect it. The wind, the ropes, the rhythm of waves, all of it familiar. Then one night, that rhythm breaks. The lookout screams from the crow's nest, a sail on the horizon, dark against the moon. The captain peers through his glass. A flag flutters. Not the Union Jack. Not the Dutch tricolor. It is black. A skull, or something close enough. Panic spreads like fire through the deck. Everyone knows what it means: pirates. Cannons thunder before you can blink. Splinters of wood slice through the air. Smoke, shouting, and the crack of muskets drown out thought. Men drop beside you, some dead, some praying. You are ordered to fight, but half your crew is already surrendering. The captain's voice shakes. He knows his cargo is not worth dying for. Within minutes it is over. The pirates swing aboard, shouting and laughing, not out of joy, but relief. Victory means they live another day. They move like wolves, searching for loot. You stand still, heart hammering, trying not to be noticed. One of them points at you with a rusted cutlass and grins. That grin is not friendly. Here's where your life splits in two. You can die here, or you can join them. That is how many pirates began. Not as rebels or adventurers, but as prisoners given one choice: serve or sink. Historical records show this was common. Captured sailors often forced into the crew to replace those who died in storms or fights. A single battle could leave a ship short of hands, and every able body counted. If you refused, they might throw you overboard, or maroon you on a barren island with nothing but a bottle of water and a pistol for when the thirst gets too loud. So you nod. You take the oath, and suddenly you are no longer who you were. The transition is brutal. You are stripped of your clothes, your weapons, your name. Whatever flag you served, whatever country you belonged to, gone. In their place, a new identity is forced on you. You are now part of the crew, but not yet trusted. A half member, half prisoner, tested daily by the others. Your first night on board is a kind of hell. The air below deck is hot and thick, full of sweat and decay. Hammocks sway in the dark. Someone snores. Someone else mutters in a fever dream. You lie awake on planks that still smell of gunpowder, your stomach churning from fear and the rolling of the ship. Every creak sounds like a threat. Every shadow could be a knife. In the morning, you wake to a voice screaming orders. You do not understand half the words: pirates, slang, curses, the strange dialects of men from everywhere. You learn fast or you suffer. They put you to work hauling ropes, patching sails, scrubbing decks. Your hands bleed. Your back aches. No one cares. The captain, or the old man, as they call him, watches you with a sharp eye. He knows fear makes good workers. But he also knows fear can breed mutiny. So he gives you rum, tells you stories, promises freedom. It is part manipulation, part survival tactic. Pirate leaders often had to balance brutality with charm. Too much of one and the crew rebelled, too little and they lost control. You see strange things on this ship. Men missing fingers, scars shaped like hooks, tattoos carved into skin with soot and gunpowder. They talk about old battles, lost comrades, impossible luck. You notice how quickly laughter turns to violence. A joke can end in a brawl. A rumor can end in blood. Still, something inside you begins to shift. Maybe it is exhaustion, maybe resignation. You stop thinking about escape. The horizon means nothing now. You are part of this floating world, this wooden coffin drifting between storms. Historians often debate whether most pirates joined by choice or by force. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Many were pressed into service, yes, kidnapped or coerced. But once aboard, some stayed willingly. Not because life was good, but because life elsewhere was worse. Merchant sailors were beaten, starved, and underpaid. Naval crews suffered discipline harsher than any pirate whip. Compared to that, piracy with its promise of shared loot and rough equality could feel like liberation, even if it came with a noose waiting at the end. But for someone like you, a new recruit, barely surviving your first week, liberation feels like a cruel joke. You start to see the cracks behind the myth. The so-called Brotherhood of the Sea is a thin disguise for desperation. The laughter hides hunger. The courage hides fear. Every man knows he is one storm or one mutiny away from death. Sometimes at night, when the waves calm and the sky opens up, you catch yourself looking for the North Star, trying to remember where home used to be. You imagine your mother lighting a candle, or your father waiting at the docks. Then the ship rolls again, and the thought dissolves. Home is not a place anymore. It is a memory that no longer fits. You start to learn the rhythms of this new life. The bell marks each watch. The sea teaches you to move without thought, how to keep balance on a heaving deck, how to sleep through cannon fire, how to drink stale water without gagging. You become part of the noise, part of the motion. That is how pirates survive, not by courage, but by becoming numb. But numbness does not erase fear. One morning, you see what happens to a man who refuses an order. The quartermaster drags him to the mast, ties his hands, and lashes him until the deck turns red. No one looks away. The message is clear: disobedience is not just punished. It is erased. After that, you stop questioning. You start mimicking the others, how they tie knots, how they curse, how they laugh. You wear their second-hand clothes, smell like their sweat. Little by little, you stop being the captured man and start becoming one of them. That is the cruelest part of all. The transformation is not forced anymore. It is voluntary. The human mind adapts quickly, even to horror. Within weeks, you find yourself cheering during raids, counting loot with trembling hands. You tell yourself it is survival, not loyalty. But deep down, you know the difference has faded. Sometimes a merchant ship surrenders before the first cannon fires. You see the faces of men just like you, terrified, pale, clutching ropes, and you can't help but remember the night you were them. You look away. You do not want to see the reflection. By the second month, you stop asking questions altogether. Your body hardens. Your voice grows coarse. The boy who once stared at the horizon is gone. In his place stands a man, shaped by salt and fear, not a hero, not even a villain, just another survivor of the sea's cruel lottery. That is how pirates were made, not in the thrill of rebellion, but in the slow erosion of choice. Each wave wore them down until there was nothing left but obedience and instinct. And once you have lived like that long enough, there is no going back. When historians write about piracy, they often begin with famous names: Blackbeard, Calico Jack, and Bonnie. But beneath those legends were hundreds of nameless souls like this, men pulled from one deck to another, stripped of their identity, and thrown into a life that was neither freedom nor captivity, but something in between. So the next time you picture a pirate ship, its black flag snapping in the wind, its crew roaring in triumph, remember this moment: a terrified sailor standing in smoke and salt, forced to choose between the ocean and the unknown. Because that was the beginning for most of them. Not a choice for adventure. A choice for survival. And that is the cruel irony of the pirate myth. The world remembers the roar, the flag, the storm. But the story truly begins in silence, in the pause between surrender and the first command shouted in a voice that is no longer yours. The ocean does not forgive repetition, yet every day on a pirate ship was the same punishment. Over and over. Wake, work, eat what you can, and try not to die before sunset. There was no morning in the sense we know it. Only the end of one shift and the start of another. The bell rang, men grumbled awake, muscles sore from a night that never really let them rest. The decks were slick with dew and salt. The ropes stiff from wind. Every movement demanded energy you did not have. The smell hit first, a mix of sweat, rot, smoke, and salt water that never left your clothes or your skin. You would think the sea breeze might wash it away, but it did not. It just moved it around. Every man aboard carried the same scent of decay and exhaustion. Breakfast was not food, it was survival ration. If you were lucky, it was hardtack, a biscuit so hard you had to crack it against your knife or soak it in rum to chew. Inside, there might be weevils, small, pale, wriggling things. You stopped noticing them after a while. Meat came salted beyond taste, packed in barrels so old they leaked brine. The water stored in wooden casks turned brown with algae within days. Some crews strained it through cloth. Others did not bother. There is a story, perhaps true, perhaps not, of a pirate who broke his tooth biting into hardtack. When he spat it out, a weevil crawled across the deck. He stared for a long time, then picked it up and ate it anyway. Protein was protein. Scurvy was the silent killer. Without fresh fruit or vegetables, the body simply began to collapse. Gums rotted, teeth loosened, old wounds reopened, and bones ached like rusted hinges. Some men went mad from the pain. Others just stopped moving. If a ship found a cove with citrus trees, they raided it like treasure. Lemons were worth more than gold. Bathing. A luxury. Fresh water was for drinking, not washing. You cleaned yourself when it rained if you could bear the cold. Some scraped salt off their skin with knives. Most did not bother. Their hair grew stiff with grease, their clothes fused with grime. Lice and fleas thrived. A man might wake scratching until he bled, and no one even looked up. Below deck was worse. The air was thick and foul. Lantern smoke clung to the ceiling, mixing with breath and mildew. Hammocks swayed above barrels. Rats scurried underfoot. The sound of coughing was constant, a low rhythm, almost part of the ship's music. The sea took its own toll. Constant motion eroded strength. Feet stayed wet for days, skin cracked, infections set in. Saltwater sores festered. If you cut your hand, you prayed it did not turn black. The surgeon, if there was one, was just another sailor with a blade and a bottle of rum. An amputation was done fast, with no bandages beyond rags and no anesthesia beyond screams. You might think this would break them, and it did, slowly. But people adapt. Humans always do. After a month, the stench stopped bothering you. After 2, you could drink water that smelled like rot without flinching. After 3, you forgot what clean even meant. There was an order in this chaos, a grim efficiency. Each man had a task: swabbing the deck, repairing sails, tending weapons, steering, or standing watch. Every muscle, every moment, contributed to keeping the ship alive. Because if the ship failed, everyone drowned. Food shortages were common. When supplies ran low, the quartermaster rationed meals. Quarrels broke out. Men stole from barrels at night. If caught, they faced lashes or worse. The punishment was not always from cruelty, it was from necessity. One thief could doom them all. Rats became both enemy and meal. You would see them darting across ropes, gnawing holes through sacks of flour. Sometimes, when hunger grew too sharp, they became dinner. Sailors roasted them over lanterns, skin crackling, bones brittle. Desperation makes everything taste the same. There were also storms. Not the heroic kind from paintings, just endless gray, days of rain and screaming wind. The deck became a death trap. Men tied ropes around their waists to avoid being swept away. The ship groaned like a living creature, in pain. During one of these tempests, food barrels might burst, or water stores spill. Afterward, everyone worked in silence, cleaning, repairing, counting what was left. Hunger always followed a storm. Disease spread fast. A fever could take 3 men in a week. Dysentery made even strong sailors collapse. There were no doctors, no quarantine, just hope that it would not reach you. If someone died, they were sewn into canvas with a cannonball at their feet and slid into the water. No prayers, no ceremony. Just another splash, then quiet. Still, amid all this misery, there were moments of strange calm. When the sea flattened into glass and the sun sank slow and red, the crew sat on the deck, chewing hardtack in silence. Someone hummed a tune, someone else laughed about nothing. For a few minutes, they looked less like criminals and more like ghosts, men caught between life and death, waiting for whichever would notice them first. You start to see the small rituals that kept them human. They carved names into the wood, swapped stories about impossible luck, argued about home. A bit of rum passed from hand to hand was enough to raise spirits. The laughter sounded rough, but it meant they were still alive. Sometimes they fished. A lucky catch meant a feast. The cook, usually a crippled sailor too injured for battle, gutted the fish with a rusted knife, boiled it in seawater, and handed it out in chipped bowls. For that one meal, everyone forgot the stench, the sores, the fear. Salt and smoke, laughter and light, a brief illusion of normal life. Then dawn came again, and the grind resumed. Historians often describe pirate ships as floating hells, and it is not far from truth. Every part of daily life, food, rest, hygiene, was a battle against decay. The sea did not just threaten from without. It invaded from within. It salted your blood, shriveled your skin, replaced sleep with delirium. And yet, paradoxically, these men feared land even more. On land waited law, capture, and the gallows. Out here, in filth and hunger, they could still pretend to be free. That is how twisted survival becomes when the world leaves you no clean choice. You would think morale would collapse, but sometimes hardship breeds a strange loyalty. Shared pain made them brothers in ways comfort never could. They joked about dying together, cursed the same storms, spat at the same stars. In that, they found identity. The ship was their world, their curse, their home. By now, you, the unwilling recruit, have stopped dreaming of escape. You chew the same hardtack, share the same rum, laugh at the same filthy jokes. You still remember land, but it feels like fiction. Out here, dirt and disease are constants, but so is motion. You have become part of the rhythm, the groan of wood, the hiss of waves, the whisper of the wind through torn sails. Somewhere inside, a small voice still whispers that this can't last. But you have learned not to listen. Because the only thing worse than this life is the fear of losing even this. That is the truth behind the myth of pirate adventure. The sea did not offer glory, it offered endurance. Every day was proof that humans can adapt to almost anything, even misery. But adaptation is not triumph. It is surrender, dressed as survival. And for pirates, that surrender became a way of life. By now you have accepted the filth, the hunger, the sleepless nights. You have learned that the ocean takes what it wants and gives nothing back. But something about this ship still surprises you, despite the chaos. There is order, not the kind written in law books, but carved in fear, blood, and necessity. Pirate life might have looked wild, but it was not without rules. Every crew lived by a written or spoken code, the Articles of Agreement. On land, it would have sounded absurd that criminals had constitutions. Yet, in the middle of the sea, fairness was survival. When a new recruit joined, the quartermaster read the articles aloud. The ship gathered around, barefoot and sunburnt, listening in silence. The rules varied from ship to ship, but the meaning was the same. Everyone got a voice, a share, and a warning. One article might say, "He who steals from another shall suffer marooning." Another, "He who fights his comrade shall lose his share and be whipped." And another, more practical, "Every man shall keep his arms clean and ready. Sloth will not be tolerated." At first, it sounds like equality. One man, one vote. Loot divided not by class or rank, but by contribution. Captains could be voted out. Decisions were made in open council. Compared to the navies and merchant ships of the time ruled by tyrants and aristocrats, it almost looked democratic. But it was not freedom. It was control disguised as fairness. You learn this quickly. The same crew that cheers the word equal will still watch without blinking as a man is flogged for breaking curfew. Discipline was swift, public, and absolute. There were no prisons, no trials, only punishment. A petty thief caught stealing rum might be tied to the mast and lashed 50 times. A mutineer could be shot, hanged, or marooned. A man guilty of cowardice might have his ears sliced off and nailed to the mast as a reminder. It was not cruelty for cruelty's sake, it was order maintained through fear. The irony is sharp. Pirates, the supposed champions of rebellion, built their own miniature kingdoms, floating societies with constitutions, elections, and brutal enforcement. Freedom meant nothing without structure. You see it play out in daily life. The captain commands during battle, but once the smoke clears, the quartermaster becomes king. He handles rations, loot, and disputes. If there is a disagreement, the crew votes. Sometimes fists decide faster than ballots. This strange democracy was practical, not idealistic. On a ship where everyone carried weapons and slept beside the same powder barrels, equality was not a virtue, it was insurance. Keeping everyone fed, armed, and slightly content was the only way to survive months in isolation. Even loot was handled with ritual precision. After a successful raid, the plunder was piled on deck for inspection. Gold, rum, tobacco, sugar, whatever could be traded or consumed. Then came the division. The captain usually received 2 shares. The quartermaster 1.5, and every sailor 1. The wounded got extra compensation, sometimes called insurance money. If you lost a limb, the ship owed you silver. It was crude, but it worked. In a world where the law offered nothing but a noose, this was the closest thing to justice. But equality did not mean safety. You might have a vote, but the sea had the final say. A single storm could scatter fairness to the wind. When the ship ran low on supplies, votes meant nothing. The quartermaster rationed as he pleased. When tempers flared, elections turned into brawls. The same democracy that gave you a voice could turn on you without warning. One night, a dispute breaks out over stolen rum. Two men accuse each other. The quartermaster decides on trial by combat, swords on deck, moonlight as witness. You watch as they fight, blood slicking the boards. One man falls, his throat opened. The crowd cheers, then drags the body aside. The code has been followed. Justice, in its own savage form, has been served. You realize then that the code is not about morality. It is about keeping the machine running. The ship does not care who is right, it only cares that order is restored. Still, there is something oddly human in it. Beneath the violence and fear, there is a twisted sense of brotherhood. These men, outcasts and thieves, have built a society more balanced than the kingdoms they fled. Every law they broke on land, they rewrote at sea, not out of virtue, but necessity. It makes you wonder, maybe all systems are like that. Born from chaos, shaped by fear, justified by words. The pirates did not rebel against order, they just built their own version of it. During quieter nights, the crew sometimes gathered to readjust the code. A man might propose a new rule: no gaming on Sundays, or no women aboard without consent of the crew. They would vote, argue, drink, and settle it. It was crude politics, but politics all the same. You start to see why some men stayed even when they could leave. On land, they were nobodies, poor, punished, invisible. At sea, they were equals, even if equality came with a lash. That illusion of dignity was enough to keep them loyal. Some historians call it the first workers' republic, a raw experiment in shared power. But living inside it, you know better. It is not a republic. It is a balancing act between desperation and discipline. Without one, the other collapses. You watch the captain closely. He is not a tyrant, not exactly. He speaks little, acts fast, and never eats before his men. But when someone disobeys, his temper is terrifying. He knows the crew fears him, and he needs them to. Power on a pirate ship is not inherited. It is earned and constantly tested. The moment the captain looks weak, someone else takes the wheel. There is an unspoken rule here: everyone's replaceable. Even you. One day, the captain gathers the crew. The wind's calm, the sea almost kind. He stands by the mast, coat torn, eyes sharp. We live by the code, he says. Not for kings, not for God, but for each other. Break it, and you will answer to the sea. No one argues. They all nod, half out of belief, half out of exhaustion. You nod too. Not because you agree, but because disagreement is not an option. That is the heart of pirate order, a fragile illusion of choice, wrapped in blood and salt. A democracy that exists because no one dares to test it too hard. And yet, somehow it works. The ship keeps moving. The men obey. The sea allows it for now. When you look at the faces around you, scarred, weathered, sunburnt, you see something almost noble. Not in the romantic sense, but in survival itself. These were men who built order out of chaos, who turned rebellion into structure, who lived by rules they invented in defiance of every empire that despised them. It does not make them heroes. It makes them human. And that is far more interesting. Because in the end, this so-called pirate democracy was never about freedom. It was about staying alive long enough to taste it. Night came fast at sea. Not like on land, where darkness drifts in softly and the sky changes its mind for a while. Here, one moment the world was blue, and the next, it was black. The first thing you learn on a pirate ship is that night never really means rest. It means rotation. Watches. Long hours of half-silence broken only by wind, ropes, and the occasional murmur of men who've forgotten what day it is. You are assigned to the midnight watch, the hardest one. The world feels smaller then, like the sea has swallowed the sky. The lantern near the helm swings gently, its flame fighting the breeze. The waves slap against the hull, steady and cruel, like the heartbeat of something alive beneath you. Your job is simple: look, listen, and survive boredom without losing your mind. You scan the horizon for sails, merchant ships to chase, navy ships to flee. Sometimes you see nothing for hours, only the rolling black surface reflecting a crooked moon. At first, the quiet feels peaceful. But too much quiet makes the mind restless. It starts inventing things. A shadow that looks like a sail. A sound that feels like whispering. The creak of wood that, for one split second, sounds like someone saying your name. You shake your head, tell yourself it is the wind, always the wind. But after weeks of hunger, exhaustion, and constant rocking, you are not so sure anymore. Other men hear it too. You can tell by how they stare into the dark, eyes unfocused. They whisper about ghost sailors drowned in storms, captains betrayed by their crews, ships that still sail under no flag at all. Every culture aboard has its own version. Some say the ocean remembers every death, that the waves hum with the voices of the lost. The stories start to make sense after a while, because the sea does talk not in words but in patterns. When the wind shifts, it is warning you. When the water stills, it is waiting for something. When the waves rise suddenly, you can almost feel the breath of something ancient exhaling beneath the ship. You start believing, not because you are superstitious, but because belief keeps you sane. It gives the chaos a shape. There is one night you will never forget. The sky is clear, the stars sharp as needles. The ship glides silently, sails full but steady. You are leaning on the rail, fighting sleep, when you see something, a faint light far out on the horizon. It flickers once, then twice. Like a lantern. You call another man to look. He squints, nods, says he sees it too. Maybe it is another ship. Maybe. But then it moves too fast, too low. Almost like it is skimming the surface. The light vanishes. No one talks about it. You both know what you saw, and you both decide it is better not to name it. Out here, naming things gives them power. Hallucinations are part of the job. The sea does not need magic to mess with your head. Lack of sleep, dehydration, sunstroke, they blend into dreams that walk around in daylight. You have seen men swear there were hands reaching out from the water. Others claim to see islands that disappeared when dawn came. One man dove overboard chasing a woman's voice. They never found him. The veterans tell you not to stare too long at the horizon. It plays tricks, they say. The distance moves when you are not looking. The sea likes to see who is paying attention. Sometimes, during calm nights, the surface glows faintly, phosphorescent plankton lighting up the waves in eerie green-blue trails. To the untrained eye, it looks supernatural. To you, it is the ocean showing off. Beauty and danger are always mixed here. Sleep becomes a rumor. You nap in fragments, 10 minutes here, 20 there. Dreams blur with memory. You wake unsure of what is real. Was there lightning last night, or just flashes behind your eyes? Did you hear thunder or someone crying? The sea does not care either way. It keeps moving. During these nights, the ship feels like a creature of its own, the wood groaning, the ropes sighing, the sails breathing. You start to think of it as alive. Not metaphorically. Genuinely alive. A floating beast made of planks and canvas and human exhaustion. It eats your strength and keeps you moving. Every now and then, a bird appears out of nowhere, circling the mast. It is a good sign, it means land is not far. The men watch it like it is an omen. If the bird lands on the ship, they cheer. If it flies away, they go quiet. Superstition keeps order better than any captain. It gives meaning to the meaningless. The older pirates carry charms, bones, coins, bits of rope, even teeth. Some pray to saints, others to the sea itself. One man has a tattoo of an anchor over his heart. He says it will weigh his soul down so it won't drift forever when he dies. You believe him, not because it is true, but because it is comforting. After months of this, you start to feel the sea's rhythm deep inside you. When it is calm, your body relaxes without thinking. When it shifts, you tense before anyone else notices. You have become tuned to its moods, like an instrument left too long in salt air. But there is a price. The more you understand the sea, the less you understand yourself. One night, a storm rolls in fast, furious, all at once. The sky collapses into thunder. Waves rise taller than the mast. Men shout, curse, pray. You grip the rail as water slams into your chest. The deck tilts, barrels roll, ropes snap. Lightning flashes, and for 1 second, you see faces in the foam screaming, human, gone in the next blink. You tell yourself it is imagination. You tell yourself you are not losing your mind. But something inside you whispers that maybe, just maybe, the sea is alive after all, and tonight, it is hungry. Hours later, when the storm finally breaks, the world feels quiet in a way that is almost holy. The clouds part, moonlight spills across the deck, and everything glitters: ropes, puddles, eyes. You breathe for the first time in hours, lungs burning. A few men did not make it. Their hammocks hang empty now. The captain says nothing. No one asks. That night, while the others sleep, you stay awake, staring at the stars. They look cold, distant, indifferent. You realize that the sea is not cruel because it hates you. It is cruel because it does not care at all. In that indifference there is a kind of truth. The same truth that built this life, that freedom is not safety, and the open world is rarely kind. From then on you change. The fear does not leave, but it settles into something else: respect. You stop cursing the waves and start listening to them. You learn to move with the roll of the ship instead of against it. You stop fighting the rhythm. You become part of it. And when dawn finally comes, pink light breaking over the black horizon, you understand what every pirate eventually learns: the sea does not belong to anyone. It owns everything that touches it. You laugh quietly to yourself, realizing the irony. Freedom was supposed to mean ownership of your own life. But out here, the price of that freedom was surrender. The ocean does not need to chain you. It only needs time. By the time the lookout cries sail ahead, your stomach twists. You already know what comes next. There is no thrill in it anymore, just preparation, like lighting a fuse you can't put out. The horizon splits in two, your ship and theirs. Theirs is fat with cargo, white sails puffed with wind. Yours moves like a shadow, sails patched, hull scarred, crew silent. Everyone knows the drill. The flag stays down, plain cloth, no black skull, not yet. Pirates did not always fly their colors immediately. The element of surprise was worth more than fear. The quartermaster checks the cannons. Powders dry, fuses ready. Muskets are passed out, blades sharpened. You can feel the hum of adrenaline under the surface, like static before lightning. Then, at the captain's signal, the black flag rises. The Jolly Roger. The skull, the hourglass, the bones, it does not matter which design. What matters is what it means: surrender or die. The merchant ship hesitates. Maybe its crew thinks you are bluffing. Maybe they think help will come. You hope they surrender. Every man does. But pride, or fear, or stupidity makes them fire first. The air explodes. Cannons roar, smoke chokes the deck, the ship shudders under recoil. The first volley rips through the merchant's side. Splinters fly like daggers. Men shout, stumble, reload. The deck trembles as another broadside hits. Someone screams a sound too sharp to forget. You run where you are told. Fire, reload, duck, repeat. It is chaos, smoke, heat, and confusion. The noise is so loud your thoughts disappear. You stop hearing commands and just move by instinct. The only rhythm left is destruction. Then comes the boarding. Grappling hooks arc through the air, bite into wood. Ropes pull tight. You leap across the gap with the others, blade drawn. For a moment you are flying between ships, between worlds. Then your boots slam down and the nightmare begins. There is no choreography here. No clever duels or shouted one-liners. It is messy, close and fast. Cutlasses, hatchets, pistols, whatever kills quickest. The deck turns slick underfoot. You swing without thinking, parry, shove, grab. A man lunges at you and misses. You do not. It is over in minutes, though it feels longer. The merchant crew drops their weapons, hands shaking. Some cry. You are breathing hard, chest burning, face streaked with soot and sweat. The air tastes of iron and smoke. Then the silence. Always the same heavy silence after battle, the moment when everyone realizes who is still breathing. The captain steps forward. He offers surrender terms, hand over cargo, no one else dies. The merchant captain nods, too broken to speak. Loot is hauled over, barrels of sugar, tobacco, cloth, sometimes rum. Gold or silver if you are lucky. Rarely treasure, never enough to match the stories. That is the truth no one tells. Most pirate treasure was groceries. Commodities. Trade goods stolen and sold in secret ports. The chests of jewels. The endless gold. That is the myth born from ballads sung by people who never smelled gunpowder. But myths have their uses. They make the fear work. When other ships hear about the attack, they might surrender faster next time. The legend becomes a weapon. While the quartermaster counts the loot, the crew searches the merchant vessel for supplies, water, medical stores, anything useful. The wounded lie in rows. Some still groaning, some not. The surgeon moves between them, sleeves soaked in red. His tools are simple, knife, needle, rum. Sometimes mercy is quicker. The prisoners are locked below deck until a decision's made. Sometimes they are released. Sometimes not. Too many mouths to feed, too many risks of betrayal. The sea keeps secrets. Back on your ship, the mood changes fast. Battle's over. Adrenaline turns to exhaustion. The men cheer, laugh, slap each other's backs. They drink rum like it can wash away the screams. You try to join them, but the smell of blood still clings to you. You close your eyes and see flashes the man you struck, the look in his eyes before he fell. You tell yourself it was him or you. It always is. By dawn, the merchant ship is a skeleton, stripped bare and drifting. You sail on, its wreck shrinking behind you, the sea swallowing evidence as it always does. Here's the strange part, despite the horror, there is a sense of order to it. Violence has rules here. The code demands fair shares, no unnecessary cruelty, no killing after surrender. Some captains followed that strictly. Others did not. The difference between justice and murder depended on who held the pistol. You have seen both kinds. The cold, efficient raids that end with no blood spilled. And the other kind, the frenzied ones, driven by rage or drink where no one walks away clean. Either way, the pattern repeats. Spot, chase, fight, plunder, vanish. The cycle feeds itself until you forget there is any other way to live. The ocean becomes an endless loop of hunger and noise. And yet, every new recruit still clings to the old stories, the glamorous side of piracy. They talk about treasure islands, secret maps, fortunes buried under palm trees. You smile but do not correct them. Let them keep the dream a little longer. The truth will find them soon enough. The real treasure is not gold. It is time. Time before the next storm, before the next battle, before the rope. In the quiet after a raid, you start to notice the cost. The deck is stained, the air heavy with smoke. Some men laugh too loudly. Others sit staring into nothing, eyes glazed. You can tell who won't last much longer. It is not the wounds that kill most, it is the silence afterward. A few days later, the captain gathers the crew to divide the shares. The loot sits piled on deck, glinting in the sun. He speaks the familiar words. We fought together, we eat together. Everyone cheers. Each man gets his portion, small, but fair. You take yours, stare at it, realize it is less than what a merchant earns in a month. But no one here cares about money for long. Rum, women, gambling, death, most spend their shares before the next voyage begins. You have seen men die broke within a week of being rich. That is the secret the legends hide. Pirates were not chasing wealth, they were running from poverty. From punishment. From themselves. You start to wonder which part of the myth will survive this century. Probably not this, the hunger, the rot, the fear. History prefers cleaner stories. It keeps the thunder and edits out the smell. But you will remember. You will remember how it really felt, the deck trembling under cannon fire. The taste of salt and blood, the look of a dying man trying to say something you will never hear. That is what piracy truly was, not freedom, not glory, not romance. Just men trapped in a cycle of violence they called adventure because it sounded better than despair. When night falls again, the flag is lowered, the ship goes dark, and you lie in your hammock listening to the timbers creak. Somewhere out there, another vessel sails, another crew waiting to repeat the same dance. The myth sails on, too. It always does. Every pirate story ends the same way, not with a chest of gold, but with a rope. You start hearing whispers long before you see the gallows, a navy ship spotted off the coast, a reward posted in a colonial port, an informant who traded names for mercy. One dawn, the lookout's cry splits the air, sails astern. At first you think it is another merchant ship. Then you see the pattern. On the flag, white and red, clean and official. A warship. The kind built to hunt people like you. The captain curses, orders full sail. The wind's wrong, the current worse. You can feel the fear spread across the deck like fire. No one talks about capture, but everyone's thinking it. The black flag that once meant power now feels like a target. The chase lasts hours. Cannons boom, wood splinters, canvas tears. The navy's faster, heavier, disciplined. Their shots find you easily. By sunset the sea burns orange, smoke curling from your deck. The captain's wounded, the rudder's gone. There is nowhere left to run. The call comes quietly, strike the colors. The black flag drops. For a second, silence. Then ropes hit the deck, and the soldiers climb aboard. There is no glory in surrender. You are forced to your knees, wrists bound. They count the survivors, separate officers from crew. A few men resist and are cut down. The rest stare at the planks, knowing this is the last ship they will ever stand on. You are taken ashore, shackled and filthy. The sunlight feels wrong, too bright after months in dimness. Crowds gather to see you march through the streets. Some shout insults, others stare with a strange pity. Children point and whisper. You look less like a monster and more like a warning. The trial comes quickly. Pirates were not given much time to speak. You are tried under the Admiralty Court, no jury of peers, no chance of acquittal. The judges wear powdered wigs and polished shoes, their words clipped and final. You listen as they list your crimes: robbery, murder, mutiny, theft on the high seas. Each word feels heavier than the last. When they ask for your plea, you hesitate. Some men shout that they are innocent. Others confess everything, too tired to lie. You just stay silent. The outcome's already written. The prosecutor reads witness statements, merchant captains describing raids, sailors identifying faces, a Navy lieutenant testifying about the battle that ended it all. The courtroom smells of ink and salt. Outside you can hear gulls. They sound almost like laughter. Then the verdict: guilty. The sentence: death by hanging. Some men break. Some pray. One laughs so hard he starts coughing blood. You just stare at your hands, wrists scarred by rope, and think how strange it is that the same sea that gave you freedom has handed you to the law. You spend your last night in a damp cell. The walls drip, the floor smells of mold. Someone down the hall sings softly a shanty you know by heart. It was once a song of defiance. Now it sounds like a lullaby. Sleep does not come. You think about home, about how the world will remember you. Probably as a monster, maybe as a ghost. But not as a person. That is the last thing piracy takes, your humanity. At dawn the guards come. The walk to the gallows is short, but it feels endless. The crowd waits, buzzing with morbid curiosity. You wonder how many of them once cheered pirate songs in taverns. Now they have come to watch the real ending. The scaffold smells of pitch and fear. The rope swings gently in the breeze. You notice the fraying fibers, the knot tied clean and practiced. The hangman does not meet your eyes. The preacher asks if you have final words. Some men curse the crown. Others beg forgiveness. You look out at the harbor, instead the same water you once ruled. Ships move in the distance, small and bright against the blue. For a moment you almost smile. The sea does not care. It never did. Then the hood drops, the trapdoor opens, and everything stops. That is how most pirate legends ended, in a public square, bodies swinging in the wind. The British called it justice. The townsfolk called it cleansing. The sea called it routine. Sometimes they left the corpses hanging for days as a warning to others. The bodies turned with the tide, gulls circling overhead. It was not spectacle. It was message. Order re-establishing itself. Civilization reminding chaos who was boss. And yet, even as pirates died, their stories refused to. Songs spread from port to port, each retelling standing off the grime. The filth became bravery, the fear became daring, the hunger became adventure. By the time the last bodies were cut down, the myth was already untouchable. That is the irony history never admits. The more brutally the world punished pirates, the more beautifully it remembered them. You can almost see it happening centuries later: books, plays, movies, all polishing the bones of those who swung from the gallows. The legend of freedom outlived the truth of suffering. But if you stand long enough at any old harbor, at dusk, you can feel both, the romance and the rot. The sea still whispers both names. For the world, piracy ended in the early 1700s. For the men who lived it, it ended at dawn on the scaffold. The rope creaked, the crowd gasped, and the story dissolved into air. Yet, somehow, the dream of rebellion at sea, the black flag, the endless horizon still stirs something in us. Maybe not because we want to live like them, but because we understand the hunger that drove them. The wish to break from control, to write our own laws, to exist outside the map. The sea punished that wish. But it also made it immortal. And that is the real ending. Not the rope. Not the drop, but the echo. Because every myth that survives does so at a cost, and someone always pays it first. When the storm of history settles, all that is left is reflection, quiet, like the sea after battle. The ships are gone, the bodies buried or forgotten, but the questions remain. Why do we still talk about them? Why does the word pirate still spark something in us, a flicker of defiance, a hint of envy, maybe even admiration? It is strange, is not it? We know what they were, thieves, killers, desperate men who lived in filth and died in ropes. Yet the legend shines brighter with every century. Somewhere between horror and heroism, we turn them into symbols. But what do they really symbolize? Maybe freedom. Maybe rebellion. Maybe the part of us that still wants to escape the quiet obedience of normal life. We romanticize what we can't bear to live. It is safer that way. Think about it, the idea of leaving everything behind, sailing into a horizon with no law, no master, no clock. It is intoxicating. Until you realize what it really costs. Because freedom, without structure or mercy, becomes its own kind of cage. The pirates learned that too late. What they built was not liberty, it was survival dressed in bold colors. Their democracy was born from desperation, their courage from hunger. When you peel back the layers of myth, what you find is not adventure. It is endurance. That is the first lesson. Freedom without compassion becomes cruelty. A ship ruled by fear and hunger will call itself free, but it is still chained to its own chaos. The second lesson, myths exist because we need them. We smooth the edges of reality because truth alone is too heavy to carry. The stories of pirates gave people something the real world could not: excitement, rebellion, the illusion that even the powerless could shape destiny. Maybe that is why we keep retelling it, to make sense of our own contradictions. We hate law but crave order. We dream of escape but cling to comfort. Pirates lived at that intersection, the place where human longing collides with human limitation. If you think about it, every society has its pirates, people who reject the system, sometimes out of greed, sometimes out of principle. The names change: rebels, outlaws, hackers, whistleblowers, but the rhythm is the same. They rise when rules grow too rigid, and they fall when chaos proves worse. That is the third lesson. Rebellion is a cycle, not a solution. It breaks things open, but it does not always build something better. Still, we owe them something. Not the pirates themselves, maybe, but what they represented. They forced the world to face its own corruption, the greed of empires, the cruelty of navies, the hypocrisy of merchants who called them criminals while profiting from the same violence. Pirates exposed the truth that civilization and savagery often share a handshake. One wears gold, the other rags, but both take what they want. And yet, inside that brutality, there was also humanity, laughter, loyalty, even tenderness. Men who buried each other at sea, who sang together at dusk, who risked everything for a taste of belonging. They were criminals, yes, but also human beings trapped between hunger and hope. Maybe that is the fourth lesson. Morality is not simple when survival is the only law. It is easy to judge them from the shore. It is harder when you imagine being there, starving, hunted, half mad from sun and fear. What choices would you make? How far would you go to stay alive another day? Piracy strips humanity down to its rawest form. No titles, no ranks, no illusions. Just people trying to outlast an indifferent sea. And maybe that is why their ghosts still linger not as villains or heroes, but as mirrors. They remind us what it means to be human when everything else is gone. The sea teaches strange lessons. It does not shout them. It wears them into you. It teaches patience by taking its time, humility by showing its power, silence by stretching forever. You start to see why sailors said the ocean had a soul. Not because it was kind, but because it reflected every mood of the human spirit: calm, fury, beauty, and indifference all at once. So what do we take from their story now, in an age of maps and machines, when the world feels smaller and safer? Maybe the lesson is this: every freedom has a price, and every story we love hides a shadow. When we dream of breaking the rules, we should remember what happens when there are no rules left to break. And yet, maybe we need those dreams too. Because without them, we would stop testing our boundaries. We would stop asking what more there could be beyond the horizon. That is the paradox of the pirate's story. It warns us and tempts us at the same time. It tells us not to stray too far, while whispering that maybe we should. Perhaps that is the final truth, that the legend of the pirate is not about crime at all. It is about longing. For freedom, for recognition, for meaning in a world that trades both for comfort. The real treasure they chased was not gold. It was escape from poverty, from injustice, from invisibility. The sea was their gamble, their rebellion, their confession. And though it destroyed them, it also immortalized them. So the next time you see that black flag in a movie or a book, remember what it really meant. Not power, not victory, but defiance in the face of certainty. A refusal to go quietly. A last, reckless laugh before the storm. The rope ended their lives, but not their story. Because stories like theirs do not die, they transform. They become caution and fascination all at once. They remind us that the edge between hero and criminal is thin as a blade, and sometimes both bleed the same. If you listen closely to the wind, to the waves, maybe even to your own restless thoughts, you can still hear them. Not as monsters, but as echoes. The echoes of men who dared to live without permission. And as the sea keeps rolling on, centuries later, it carries both their sin and their song. There is a certain kind of silence that only the ocean can make heavy, unbroken, thick enough that you can almost feel it pressing on your chest. It is not peace. It is absence. Out here, far from land, the silence eats at you. The sea is vast, but pirate life made it feel smaller by the day. Every plank, every rope, every creek became part of a prison without walls. The ship was home, but it was also confinement, a floating cage with nowhere to run. At first, you think you can handle it. The endless blue seems beautiful. You stare at the horizon and pretend it is freedom. But the longer you stare, the more you realize it never changes. You move for weeks, and the world looks the same. No landmarks, no sound except the wind. Just motion without progress. That is when fear starts to grow, not the sharp kind that hits in battle, but the slow, quiet kind that spreads beneath your thoughts. You stop trusting the calm. You start waiting for disaster. Pirates lived in constant uncertainty. One storm, one mutiny, one cannon shot, and everything ended. They did not talk about it much. You could not afford to. Fear was like rot, let it spread, and the ship would fall apart from within. So they laughed instead. They drank, gambled, cursed, sang. Every joke was a defense. Every loud story was a way to drown out the silence underneath. That was their medicine. Rum for the body, noise for the mind. But noise only works for so long. You start noticing how time disappears. There are no calendars at sea, no Sundays or Mondays, just light and dark. The mind needs rhythm to stay steady. Without it, days bleed together until memory blurs. You can't tell whether something happened yesterday or a month ago. You begin to lose track of who you were before all this. You stop dreaming of land. Not because you do not miss it, but because land starts to feel imaginary. You remember trees, roofs, firelight, and it is like remembering a story someone else told you. Some men cracked. You could see it in their eyes long before it happened. They would stare out at nothing for hours, whispering to themselves. Some claimed to hear voices in the waves. Others swore they saw islands that vanished by dawn. Hallucinations were not rare, they were routine. Hunger, dehydration, exhaustion, infection, all blending into madness. There is a story of a pirate who started talking to the ship. Not to the crew, not to God, to the ship itself. He said it listened. He said it told him when storms were coming. Maybe it did. He survived 3 wrecks before disappearing during a 4th. No one saw him go overboard. The sea, indifferent and endless, does not fight you. It waits. It lets your own mind do the work. The worst hours were the calm ones, no wind, no waves, just stillness. The ship stuck in place, sails limp, water shining like glass. At first, it looked peaceful. Then the heat came. The barrels of water went foul. Flies appeared out of nowhere. Men grew restless, angry for no reason. Calm seas drove more crews insane than storms ever did. The hierarchy held only as long as fear did. When the fear changed shape, when it turned inward, the order collapsed. Paranoia set in. You would hear whispers, the cooks hoarding food, the quartermasters hiding rum, the captains cursed. A crew could turn on itself overnight. One morning you wake to find the man who slept beside you gone, not missing, just gone. No one saw him fall. No one asks? Maybe he jumped, maybe he did not. The sea does not return what it takes. There is no privacy on a ship, but there is loneliness everywhere. You could stand surrounded by 50 men and still feel invisible. Everyone's trapped in their own head, and some heads are louder than others. Fear changes shape with time. At first, it is fear of death. Then it becomes fear of meaninglessness, the thought that you could die out here and not a single person on land would ever know your name. You start wondering if the world itself would even notice your absence. That thought keeps you awake more than danger ever did. You begin to understand why pirates drank so much, why they sang until they lost their voices, why they picked fights over nothing. Anything was better than thinking too long. But beneath all that noise, there is something else too, a strange intimacy. You live, eat, fight, and nearly die beside the same men every day. Bonds form in the strangest ways. You would share your last piece of bread with someone you threatened to stab an hour ago. Out here, connection was not about liking someone, it was about needing them to stay sane. That was the paradox of pirate life. You hated the crew and depended on them completely. You feared the sea and trusted it with your life. You chased freedom but prayed for routine. It is easy to see now that the real battle was not against navies or storms, it was against isolation, against the erosion of self. The ocean did not kill pirates. Time did. You can still feel traces of that psychology today in anyone who has lived too long in uncertainty, anyone who has stared at the same horizon and started to lose track of who they are. The pirate's story is just a louder version of something deeply human, the struggle to hold on to identity when the world feels endless and empty. That is what made them both terrifying and tragic. They were not fearless. They were afraid all the time, they just kept moving anyway. So the next time you imagine a pirate standing at the bow, wind in his hair, laughing into the storm, do not picture bravery. Picture defiance. Picture someone who has already lost everything except motion, and refuses to stop because stopping would mean thinking, and thinking would mean breaking. And maybe that is the quietest truth of all. That courage is not the absence of fear. It is fear that is been out at sea too long and learned to row anyway. History has a habit of lying beautifully. It takes what was hard, dirty, and real and polishes it until it gleams. Pirates did not escape that treatment. They lived short, brutal lives, but the stories told about them sailed much farther than they ever did. By the time the last of them were swinging from the gallows, the world had already begun turning them into legends. Pamphlets, broadsheets, and tavern tales spread faster than their ships ever could. The same men once branded as monsters were suddenly the stars of fireside stories, rebellious, daring, clever. It did not matter that most could not read or write. The myth spoke louder than their lives. You can see why. The truth was misery. The legend was music. In the legend, pirates lived free. They danced on deck under starlight, chased treasure, defied kings. In reality, they coughed blood, slept on wet wood, and died for sacks of sugar. But which version would you rather tell? Storytellers knew what sold. They rewrote pirates as symbols of rebellion, freedom with flair. Ballads praised their courage. Plays exaggerated their honor. Illustrations turned scarred faces into charming rogues. By the 1800s, the pirate was not a criminal anymore. He was a character, colorful, fearless, irresistible. The black flag became an emblem of adventure, not terror. Children waved it at fairs. Merchants used it to sell rum. The very image that once meant death had become entertainment. It was not only fiction that shaped the myth. Governments helped too. After the golden age of piracy ended, empires needed to justify their control of the seas. So they created moral fable stories where pirates were villains, and civilization the hero. But over time, those villains became too interesting. The moral line blurred. People stopped asking who was right and started wondering what it would feel like to be the outlaw. The irony is thick. The same society that hanged pirates made them immortal. The gallows gave them gravity, and the songs gave them wings. Think about it, centuries later, their stories are everywhere. Books, movies, games, Halloween costumes. They have been romanticized into immortality, turned into something the real men would barely recognize. Would Blackbeard laugh to see his face printed on lunchboxes? Probably. Or maybe he would understand. He knew the power of image. He braided gunpowder into his beard and lit it during battle, just to look like a demon rising from hell. He understood theater. He knew fear was performance. Maybe that is the secret behind every myth. It starts with someone who knows how to look larger than life, even if they die small. But legends do not just exaggerate. They edit. They cut out the boredom, the sickness, the cruelty. They keep the flags and the rum, not the scurvy and the despair. And slowly, fiction becomes memory. When people in later centuries imagined pirates, they did not picture gaunt men chewing moldy biscuits, they pictured freedom. They pictured the open sea, the wind, the refusal to bow. It was not truth. It was wishful thinking. And maybe that is okay. Because myths are not meant to record facts, they record desires. The pirate myth survives not because it is accurate, but because it satisfies something deep in us, the longing to live by our own rules, to slip the leash of ordinary life, to find adventure beyond control. Still, there is a cost. When stories become too clean, we forget the blood that paid for them. We forget that every black flag fluttered over real bodies, real hunger, real loss. We inherit the dream but bury the warning. Modern retellings often make pirates look noble anti-heroes fighting corrupt empires. And yes, sometimes they were. But just as often, they were the corruption. They raided villages, enslaved survivors, turned desperation into domination. They were both victims and villains, and it is easier to erase that complexity than to sit with it. But history is not kind to simplifications. If you listen closely between the lines of all those songs and films, you can still hear the truth humming underneath. A cough in the dark. The creak of wet rope. The ocean reminding us that no story stays pure once it meets the salt. And yet, maybe that is the beauty of it. The myth did not just preserve pirates. It transformed them. It gave them what the real world never did: purpose. In dying, they became ideas. And ideas live longer than men. When you look at their legacy now, it is not just about ships and treasure. It is about what they represent: the eternal tug between obedience and rebellion, between order and chaos. Every age reshapes them to fit its own fears and fantasies. To the Victorians, they were cautionary tales. To Hollywood, they were charm in human form. To us, they are nostalgia, adventure without risk. Maybe that is why the black flag still flutters in our imagination. Because deep down, we know it is not about gold. It is about defiance, the refusal to let the world shrink you down to obedience. But perhaps the truest way to honor those who lived and died under it is not to glorify them, but to understand them. To see both the myth and the mud. To remember that behind every romantic story was a man too tired to dream, standing barefoot on a deck that smelled like death, staring into a horizon he would never reach. History polished him into legend, but somewhere, under all that shine, the truth still breathes rough, flawed, human. That is the difference between memory and myth. Memory remembers what happened. Myth remembers what we want it to happen. And somewhere between those two lies the real story. The story we keep telling because we still have not decided which version of ourselves we believe in more. The obedient one who stays on shore, or the desperate one who sets sail anyway. Centuries have passed since the last black flag was lowered, but somehow the world still sails with its shadow. The age of piracy might have died on the gallows, yet its ghosts drift quietly through everything that came after, in language, in art, and the way we still imagine freedom. You hear it in the words we use: buccaneer, corsair, privateer. They started as names for thieves, but now they mean adventure. What was once a curse has become a compliment. It is strange how time can wash blood clean. Look closer, and the legacy runs deeper than folklore. Pirates changed the seas not through empire or invention, but through defiance. Their rebellion forced governments to create new systems of control. Admiralty courts expanded. Naval patrols multiplied. Insurance companies were born to protect merchants from the chaos they caused. Even modern maritime law, the idea that certain crimes belong to the jurisdiction of all nations, began with the fight against piracy. In trying to destroy them, the world accidentally built new structures of power. Their defeat became the blueprint for global order. So in a twisted way, pirates helped shape the very system that condemned them. But their influence was not just political, it was psychological. They left behind a mythic residue, a dream that refuses to fade. Every age rediscovers them in its own image. In the 19th century, pirates were romanticized by writers who never saw the sea. They turned misery into melody. In the 20th century, film gave them faces: witty, reckless, charming. The camera turned hunger into charisma, cruelty into style. and in the 21st century, we made them digital hackers called pirates, corporations warning against piracy. The word still carries rebellion, just on a different ocean. That is the strange endurance of symbols, they mutate but never vanish. Once a flag means defiance, it can be folded into any age that needs it. Even the way we imagine adventure, the lone traveler, the outsider, the rule breaker chasing the horizon owes something to them. Every story about leaving safety for risk, comfort for chaos, has a bit of pirate blood in it. Yet, for all that, we rarely remember who they really were. The world's storytellers took the ragged sailors of the Caribbean and turned them into saints of rebellion. But beneath the legend's glow, the truth remains cold. They were products of poverty, war, empire, and greed. They did not reject civilization because they were philosophers, they rejected it because it rejected them first. Still, their small acts of self-governance, voting for captains, dividing loot equally, hinted at something radical. An early glimpse of equality in a world obsessed with hierarchy. They may not have known it, but their makeshift codes prefigured the democratic ideals that would later reshape nations. That is another layer of their legacy: accidental revolutionaries. They did not write constitutions. They lived them in the only space that allowed it, the deck of a stolen ship. And maybe that is why their memory lingers. Because somewhere in our collective mind, we recognize the contradiction they embodied, that freedom and destruction often walk hand in hand. You can see traces of that spirit everywhere, from protest movements to digital activism. The pirate remains a metaphor for those who refuse to play by rules they did not write. Sometimes noble, sometimes selfish, but always defiant. Even in pop culture, the appeal has not dimmed. A sword, a flag, a ship against a burning horizon, it is timeless shorthand for rebellion. Children dress as pirates every Halloween, waving toy cutlasses without knowing what the symbol cost in real blood. Adults watch movies where pirates are witty and misunderstood, not starving and half blind. We have edited them into something we can love without guilt. That is part of their genius. Unintentional though it was, they created an idea that survives by reinventing itself. The black flag adapts. It does not need ships anymore. Now it flies in data, in protest art, in underground movements, in the quiet hearts of people who'd rather risk exile than obedience. And that raises an uncomfortable truth: maybe we never got rid of piracy at all. We just changed its shape. The seas are policed. Yes, but greed still floats to the surface. Modern pirates raid data, not gold. They wear suits, not rags. The same hunger for power, for freedom, for control has just traded sails for servers. History does not erase impulses. It just modernizes them. If you strip away the swords and storms, what is left is the human core of it, the same restless energy that built and broke empires. Pirates were symptoms of imbalance, the inevitable backlash of a world that gave too little to too many. Every time inequality grows, rebellion finds a new ocean. That is their true legacy. Not the flags or the songs, but the reminder that every system carries its own shadows, and that when those shadows grow too deep, someone will always rise from them with nothing left to lose. The sea is quieter now, but the idea has not sunk. It floats between myth and memory, between history and imagination, like driftwood that refuses to rot. You can almost hear it if you listen, the faint echo of laughter through the wind, the whisper of sails long gone, the heartbeat of defiance that never really died. Because the pirates' greatest victory was not loot or legend. It was endurance. They became an idea that survived the empire that killed them. And that idea that we can live outside the map still stirs beneath the calm surface of every age that forgets what it costs to feel free. The sea is calm again now. The waves that once crashed like thunder have softened into whispers. You can almost hear the ghosts breathing, men whose names the world has forgotten, but whose shadows still flicker in the stories we tell. If you have listened this far, you have walked the whole length of their world through hunger, battle, silence, fear, and myth. You have seen what they saw, how the promise of freedom can glow so bright it blinds you, how survival can turn into surrender without anyone noticing. And now, standing on this quiet deck of history, maybe it is time to ask, what remains? The pirate age is gone, but its lessons have not drifted away. They sit like salt in the air, invisible, permanent. Each story we tell about rebellion, each dream we have about running away, carries a trace of that same hunger. Freedom. It always begins as a promise and ends as a test. The pirates dreamed of a world without kings or masters, but they found another kind of rule instead, the rule of the sea, the rule of survival. They chased the horizon and learned too late that the horizon never stays still. Maybe that is the first truth we can take with us: freedom without purpose is just drift. The ocean does not care where you are going, only that you keep moving. But there is another truth to the quieter one. That even in their failures, they showed us something fierce and human. They built order out of chaos. They gave power to the powerless, even if just for a moment. And they proved that even in the harshest corners of existence, people will still find ways to create meaning through songs, through codes, through defiance. That might be why the myth endures. Because underneath all the grime and violence, there is a pulse of recognition, the longing to matter, to leave a mark before the tide erases you. Every age writes its own kind of piracy. Not always on the sea, not always with guns, but always with the same question burning underneath: who gets to rule me? And maybe that is why these stories still hold us, not because we admire the cruelty, but because we understand the craving. We want to be the ones who choose, even if the choice costs everything. You can't stand on the deck of history without feeling both awe and grief. Awe for how far humans will go to claim a moment of autonomy. Grief for how easily that moment turns into ruin. But maybe that tension, that ache between wanting freedom and fearing it, is what makes us human. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, the ocean is still doing what it always has, swallowing what we forget, returning what we need. The waves erase footprints, but not stories. So the next time you see that black flag in a film or a book, pause for a moment. Do not think of gold. Think of hunger. Think of the creak of wood under bare feet, the smell of salt and sweat, the endless expanse of blue that looks like freedom until you live inside it. Because every myth, no matter how romantic, starts with a body that paid the price. The pirates are long gone. Their ships rot on the ocean floor. Their bones have turned to dust. But their rebellion, the raw instinct to stand against something bigger than yourself, that still floats somewhere between us and the horizon. Maybe that is why we can't stop listening to their echoes. Because they remind us that freedom is not a destination. It is a question you keep asking until the sea takes the breath to answer it. And so, tonight, as this story folds into silence, maybe let that question linger. Not as guilt, not as fantasy, but as reflection. Where does your horizon begin? And what would you give up to reach it? The deck creaks softly underfoot. The waves tap the hull, patient as time. The wind smells of distance, of endings, of beginnings. The voyage is over. The lanterns are dimming. Somewhere in the dark, the sea keeps whispering the same old lullaby, that nothing ever really disappears, it only changes shape. And as you close your eyes, remember, the sea forgets no one. Thank you for sailing through this story tonight. If you have made it here, you have followed the wake from myth to memory and back again. Until the next voyage, may your night be calm, your dreams full of horizon, and your heart steady in the tide. Good night.